Hello and welcome to this week's episode of a World Panorama, where you get a complete roundup of all the big international news stories that unfolded this week. My name is Aishwarya Kapoor and here is a look at the top stories in the headlines. President Trump says the US and China are getting closer to a trade deal as he holds talks with Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Osaka. US and India resolved to work together on trade issues after PM Modi holds bilateral with Trump. Modi also puts forward a 5-point approach to address common challenges facing the world. Further escalation of tensions between US and Iran. Trump administration imposes hard-hitting new sanctions, including on the office of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Iran accuses US of having a thirst for war. Stinging blow to Turkish President Erdogan. His ruling AK party loses control of Istanbul after a rerun of the city's mayoral election. Opposition party candidate Imamoglu wins by a margin bigger than achieved in the earlier election. And amid a raging debate over the dire conditions of migrants across southern border, US Congress passes legislation to address crisis. Democrats abandon effort to add additional migrant protections, reluctantly pass the Senate's version of $4.6 billion aid bill. The top story this week, the 14th annual summit of the group of 20 nations that took place in Osaka in Japan this week. The G20 is an international leaders forum comprising 19 countries and the European Union. Collectively, the grouping represents more than 80% of the world's economic output and 2/3 of its people. Its primary aim is to promote international financial stability. And the highlight of this year's summit was the huge challenge in resolving US-China trade war that has rattled businesses around the world and cast a shadow over the global economy. And Prime Minister Modi held several bilateral meetings during the G20 summit, including one with US President Donald Trump. He also put forward a 5-point approach to address common challenges facing the world, including protectionism, unilateralism at global financial organizations like the WTO, and terrorism. World leaders from 19 countries and the European Union met in Osaka in Japan from Friday for the 14th G20 Summit. The world leaders get together to discuss the most important financial and economic issues of the day. As expected, trade, climate change, and the crisis in relations with Iran were the big topics this year.
The trade relations between China and the US are difficult. They are contributing to the slowdown of the global economy. And in our talks, both with the US and with the Chinese authorities, President and Prime Minister, I was drawing their attention to the harmful impact this controversial matter is creating.
That is why the meeting between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping on Saturday at the summit was so closely watched. After more than an hour of what Trump called were excellent talks, Trump said that trade negotiations with China were back on track. Chinese state media said that after the talks, Washington committed not to impose any new tariffs on Beijing's exports and that the two sides had agreed to restart trade and economic talks. Trump had earlier threatened to impose tariffs on $300 billion of Chinese goods if the two sides do not strike a deal.
I look forward to working with you. As you know, we've had an excellent relationship, but we want to do something that will even it up with respect to trade. I think it's something that's actually very easy to do. I actually think that we were very close, and then something happened where it slipped a little bit, and now we're getting a little bit closer, but it would be historic if we could do a fair trade deal.
On the sidelines of the summit, Prime Minister Modi also held several bilateral meetings, including with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, South Korean President Moon Jae-in, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, President of Brazil Jair Bolsonaro, Indonesian President Joko Widodo, President of Turkey Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Most notable, however, was his meeting with US President Donald Trump in the backdrop of an ongoing trade dispute between the two strategic partners, and Trump tweeting a day earlier, calling as unacceptable the retaliatory tariffs imposed by India. After the meet, both leaders had agreed to try and resolve issues related to trade.
4 issues were taken up at this bilateral meeting. The issues were those related to Iran, to 5G, to trade, and to defense relations. Both sides agreed that we would remain in touch on the issue of Iran and that we would continue to have mutual discussions on how we ensure regional peace and stability.
The one-on-one talks with Trump were held after PM Modi, Trump and Shinzo Abe met for the Japan-America-India trilateral. PM Modi had also met Shinzo Abe separately a day earlier. During both these meets, focus was on realizing a free, stable and rules-based Indo-Pacific region.
इंडो-पैसिफिक के संबंध में हमारे कॉमन इंटरेस्ट हैं। हम इस क्षेत्र की शांति और सुरक्षा से समर्पित लोग हैं। हम लोकतंत्र के प्रति प्रतिबद्ध लोग हैं और इसलिए हम इस क्षेत्र के उज्जवल भविष्य के लिए, शांतिपूर्ण विकास के लिए पूरी तरह प्रतिबद्धता के साथ इस फोरम का भारी उपयोग कर पाएंगे।
During the summit, emphasis was also laid on the need to reform the WTO, fighting protectionism, and a strong climate change declaration. BRICS countries also condemned terrorism in all its forms. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. The Trump administration this week imposed fresh sanctions on Iran for what the US says are recent aggressive acts by Tehran, including for shooting down an American drone last Thursday. The move came on the top of actions taken by the US to cut off all revenues from Iranian oil exports, the lifeblood of the nation's economy. The latest sanctions hit specifically Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and some Iranian military commanders as well. The US says the move is to alter Iran's behavior and force political change in Tehran. However, Iran has dubbed US's actions as an economic war and says the talks with the US are impossible under current conditions. And all this has raised fears that a miscalculation or a further rise in tensions could push the US and Iran into an open conflict 40 years after Tehran's Islamic Revolution. More sanctions against Iran. US President Donald Trump on Monday signed an executive order targeting Iran's supreme leader and his associates with financial sanctions. The latest sanctions directly target Iranian supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and his office. The sanctions follow Iran's downing of a US surveillance drone over the Strait of Hormuz last week, after which Trump ordered retaliatory military strikes on Iran last week, but pulled back last minute, saying the response would have been disproportionate.
They've done many other things aside from the individual drone. You saw the tankers, and we know of other things that were done also which were not good and not appropriate. The supreme leader of Iran is one who ultimately is responsible for the hostile conduct of the regime. He's respected within his country.
With the latest action, the US administration is tightening the squeeze on already oil and financial sanctions, waiting to see if Tehran will eventually be forced to capitulate and accept negotiations. The US is demanding that Iran end its nuclear program, curb its missile production, and stop support for partner Arab militias. However, Iran has shown no interest in negotiating. Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said the Americans despise diplomacy and accused the Trump administration of having a thirst for war.
The U.S. has no respect for international law and order, as well as the views of overwhelming majority of the international community. To ease tensions in the broader Persian Gulf region, the U.S. must stop its military adventurism in our region, as well as its economic war and terrorism against the Iranian people.
Tensions between US and Iran have been rising ever since Trump pulled the US out of the nuclear pact that world powers made with Tehran in 2015 and reimposed sanctions. The sanctions have caused foreign investment to dry up and hit oil exports. The sanctions not only bar US companies from trading with Iran, but also with foreign firms or countries that are dealing with Iran. This has led to shortages of imported goods and products that are made with raw materials from abroad. But the US is looking to continually build pressure on Iran. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo this week held talks in the Middle East with officials in the UAE and Saudi Arabia about countering the military threat from Iran by building a broad global coalition against it. US insists Iran should come to the negotiating table. However, Iran has responded to the economic pressure by saying that it planned to violate some of the nuclear deal's commitments.
We're prepared to negotiate with no preconditions. They know precisely how to find us. And I am confident that at the very moment they're ready to truly engage with us, we'll be able to begin these conversations. I'm looking forward to that day.
Relations between Iran and US continue to soar, including the recent series of attacks on tankers in the Gulf, which the White House blamed on Iran. Tehran denied all allegations. Thereafter, an American drone was shot down over what the US says was international waters, but Iran says was its territory. Bureau Report, Raja Sabhati. News from the US. Amid a raging nationwide debate over the dire conditions of migrant detention centers, the US House and Senate rushed to pass legislation this week to address the crisis at the US-Mexico border. The Democratic-controlled House and the Republican-controlled Senate initially approved separate bills with about $4.5 billion aimed at improving the conditions in overcrowded migration detention centers. The bills proposed allocating money differently. But as calls to address the humanitarian situation at the border grew, the House ultimately passed the Senate's watered-down version of the bill. Photographs showing lifeless bodies of this father-daughter duo, showing the grim reality of the migration crisis unfolding on America's southern border. This Salvadoran father and his daughter drowned as they attempted to cross the Rio Grande River into Texas. The image, published in a Mexican newspaper, underlines the dangers which mostly Central American migrants face in their attempts to escape violence, corruption and poverty at home and find asylum in the United States. As part of a broader crackdown on migration, the Trump administration has made asylum seekers wait in Mexico while their claims are considered, a process which can take years. As a result, migrants turn to more dangerous routes across the southern frontier. Meanwhile, Mexico has launched its own crackdown on migrants as the government scrambles to ward off Donald Trump's threat of trade tariffs.
Nosotros estamos cumpliendo un compromiso que hicimos de.
We are fulfilling a commitment that we made at the southern border for a register for everyone who enters the country. This is a legal issue that is being carried out. At the same time, we are providing options to migrants.
Lo estamos llevando a cabo y al mismo tiempo estamos.
There has been criticism from immigration activists and Democrats of Trump's hardline immigration policies. The recent case of relocation of 250 migrant children from an overcrowded Texas border patrol station, where they were held for weeks in pathetic conditions, without adequate food and water brought into focus the condition of migrants at the border facilities. While Trump says he is concerned, he adds laws need to be amended.
Our laws are so bad. What we would like to do, and I'll do it right now officially, is ask the Democrats to give us help on asylum, help on all of the loopholes, the horrible loopholes that get signed in over a period of years that don't allow us to do what we should be able to do. We need the votes of Democrats. You have these massive numbers of people trying to get into the United States because of the economy, because we've done so good.
Amid an outcry over the treatment of detained migrant children, US Parliament's lower house, that is ruled by Democrats, approved a strict bill for an aid package to address the migrant surge along the US-Mexico border. The upper house, the Senate, ruled by Republicans, expectedly disapproved the bill. As a result, the US House of Representatives had to pass a watered-down version of the bill to send $4.6 billion in aid to tackle the humanitarian migrant crisis at the Mexico border.
This situation is child abuse. It is an atrocity that violates every value we have, not only as Americans, but as moral beings. Today, sadly, our values are being undermined by the President's failed policies, which has intensified the situation of heartbreak and horror on the border.
The scramble to send money to the border comes at a tumultuous time for US immigration policy. Lawmakers have slammed the treatment of children at migrant detention facilities. Acting Customs and Border Protection Commissioner John Sanders also resigned effective 5th of July. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. The main Turkish opposition party has won the rerun of Istanbul's mayoral election in a blow to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Opposition CHP candidate Imamoglu won with 54% of the vote. Now, Sunday's repeat election in Istanbul was held after Erdogan's ruling AK party challenged the first vote over alleged irregularities, and Turkey's electoral board nullified the results and revoked Imamoglu's mandate after just 18 days. Longtime leader Erdogan was hoping for a reversal of the original vote in March, which saw his AK party lose by a slim margin. And the result ends 25 years of AK party rule in Istanbul. It is being called as a big setback to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. After famously saying once that whoever wins Istanbul wins Turkey, his ruling AK party lost control of Istanbul after the city's mayoral election. The result ends 25 years of AK party's rule in Istanbul. The candidate for the main opposition party CHP, Ekrem Imamoglu, won 54% of the vote with nearly all the ballots counted.
This is not a victory. This is a new beginning. I would like to say from here that as of tomorrow, I will treat 16 million people equally as a mayor.
What makes the result even more interesting is the fact that it was a rerun of the election, which Imamoglu had won in March as well. That vote was annulled after ruling AK party complained of irregularities. And in the rerun, the margin of victory for Imamoglu was even bigger. In his victory speech, Imamoglu said that his supporters had fixed democracy. The opposition also gained hold of the municipality of the capital, Ankara, in the 31st of March local elections.
We knew the outcome would be like this. Imamoglu has been the winner since the beginning, and he was wronged, and those who wronged him got the answer.
The decision to rerun the vote was criticized by Western allies and caused uproar among domestic opponents who said that Turkey's democracy was under threat. After the result this time, the ruling AK party's candidate, former Prime Minister Binali Yildirim, conceded to his opponent. President Recep Erdogan also congratulated the winner. Erdogan further vowed to draw lessons and make adjustments in line with the message given by the people. The Council of European delegation observing the rerun of mayoral elections said that the elections were conducted competently, although its observers were given a less than friendly reception at some places.
I believe now is the time to turn a page. Yesterday, the citizens of Istanbul elected a new mayor in a well-organised and transparent vote, albeit in tense circumstances. The result is very clear. We expect the freely expressed will of the voters will be respected. The ballot box, not the court, is the best place to decide elections.
Erdogan has ruled the country since 2003, both as Prime Minister and now President, becoming the most powerful leader since Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the modern Turkish Republic. However, Sunday's results came as a rare electoral defeat for Erdogan and broke the ruling party's decades-old grip on Turkey's most important city. It was also a personal blow to Erdogan, whose rise in Turkish politics had started with his own election as Istanbul mayor 25 years ago. The result has given a boost to the opposition that finally feels it is capable of winning and will channel that through to the next national elections. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. News from Libya. Forces aligned to UN-recognized government have retaken Gharian, a strategic town south of the capital Tripoli. Now, Gharian is the main forward base for the eastern-based Libyan National Army, or the LNA, under military commander General Haftar, which has been fighting to take control of Tripoli for almost 3 months now. Remember, Libya has been torn by violence and division since long-time ruler Muammar Gaddafi was deposed and killed in 2011. War in Libya is heating up. Renewed clashes have been reported between rival forces near capital Tripoli. Armed clashes are on between forces of Libya's UN-recognized government and the troops loyal to the country's east-based General Khalifa Haftar. On Thursday, internationally recognized government said it had retaken the strategic town of Gharian, which serves as the main supply base for the fighters led by General Haftar. The government forces say capture of Gharian is a significant victory that should lead to a collapse of General Haftar's campaign. The government forces are aiming to take control of a former airport in Tripoli.
The airport is around 700 hectares, a very large area, and it represents to our enemy the main station. So in the next few days, we'll retake the airport and the surrounding areas so as to advance on the areas beyond it.
Libya, for 42 years, was under the authoritarian regime of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi until the 17th February revolution in 2011. There was hopes that after the overthrow of Gaddafi, the North African country will finally enjoy political and economic stability. But in May 2014, civil war erupted again when self-proclaimed General Khalifa Haftar fought Islamic State terrorists in Benghazi and later expanded the attacks into country-wide aggression with the support of local and foreign powers. Seizing most Libyan territory from east to the south, Haftar is now battling the Tripoli-based government formed in 2016 as a result of process brokered by the United Nations. He and his supporters say they are trying to restore security, trying to free the areas from militias. Khalifa's forces are now for 2 months trying to take capital Tripoli. The assault has stalled in the face of resistance from local armed groups aligned with the UN-recognized government. Libya's internationally recognized Prime Minister Faiz al-Sarraj says he won't sit down with Khalifa Haftar to negotiate an end to the 2-month offensive against Tripoli.
التقينا أكثر من 6 مرات خلال السنوات الماضية
Meeting with the Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar has surpassed events and time. We have met more than 6 times throughout the past years. It seemed at the end that he was only trying to gain time. But thank God, our forces and National Army has responded to the attack. We'll continue to resist until those forces leave.
Presently, the former airport road in Tripoli has been one of the main avenues of fighting between the two sides. The campaign on Tripoli has left at least 653 people dead and displaced more than 93,000 others, according to the United Nations, as well as causing extensive material damage. While world powers are divided in their support for war-torn Libya, the United Nations Security Council has also failed over and over again to release a unified statement on the situation in Libya, let alone form a resolution. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. That's all in this edition of the program. But before we go, take a look at a new pop-up bar in San Francisco called Rat Bar. It let people pet, snuggle and play with the rescued rats. The rats were provided by a local non-profit organization called Radical Rodent Rescue, and the visitors could tour the bar's dungeon and spend some quality time with the scurrying rodents. The visitors could also sip a rat-themed cocktail. So escape the rat race and enjoy the visuals of happy hours at this rat bar. As I take your leave, I'll see you next week in another edition of the program. Bye-bye.